Life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 with Neil Johnson on Vision.
Christian political groups are welcoming first steps towards religious freedom in Australia. A conversation today with Greg Bondar, who is at the helm of the newest politically active Christian organisation in formation called Christian Voice Australia. He says the pre-election promise by the Albanese government is coming to fruition with the much-needed review of religious exemptions for educational institutions by the Australian Law Reform Commission. Greg Bondar is joining us for his insights. Greg, welcome back to 2020.
Oh, thank you, Neil, for having me on.
Greg, you must have some reflection on where we've come from. The Morrison government, the failure to deliver the promised protections for religious schools in the Senate earlier this year. How are you reflecting on what's gone before and what the Labor government might be trying to do?
Yeah, Neil, that is a great start to the conversation here because, look, you and I both know, and so will our listeners, that the Morrison government actually drastically failed to deliver on protection for religious schools, for the individuals, for churches and what have you. And unfortunately, partly due to the fact that they left it till the 11th hour, just before the election, to try and do anything. And that was never going to happen, Neil. And the proof was in the pudding. So what's happening now is Labor have, and I had a lot of discussions with Labor and the coalition prior to the election, and they promised they would do something about religious freedom. So here they are, keeping to that promise. Now, the point we've got to understand here is that they said that they would review certain sections of religious freedom issues, including the need for protection for schools. So, look, they've delivered on that commitment, but it's not a lay-down museum. There are a lot of issues to be discussed as we go further down the track on this topic.
Of course, Polly's not always good at keeping their promises, and we'll hold that in tension because there are all sorts of evidences now that are showing that Christians are coming under pressure. The Andrew Thorburn incident with the Essendon AFL club. These sorts of things come up from time to time. They remind us that religious organisations don't have the sorts of freedoms. Individuals don't have the sorts of freedoms we thought they would have. What are your concerns about where the attacks are coming from against our religious freedom?
Oh, Neil, I think, the attacks are coming from obviously the ideologically driven, the left-wing, the woke. One of the things they're trying to do, Neil, is to undermine the basic cornerstone of the Judeo-Christian foundation that we've come to know here in Australia. One of the key things we've got to remember, Neil, is, and say to our opponents, that the right to have and to live out religious beliefs is one of the key human rights recognised in the international law. In particular, Neil, you would know that Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is critical, so we've got to maintain that. So what we've got to be doing is, and you alluded to I call it the Essendon syndrome, if these issues are going to keep coming up, but here is a man that chose faith instead of job, and I take my hat off to him because that's the way it should be, God first, everything second. So what we've got to be doing here is that Labor have come out with this review with the Australian Law Reform Commission. This is our opportunity, and I want to tell all Christians to make sure that they don't start saying, it's not good enough or it's not wide enough. It's a first step, and it's a first step to ensuring that if you're going to put in a submission, if you're going to appear before any review, that you make it what it is meant to be, and that is to make sure that we have religious freedom, particularly for schools, for sports people and what have you. So it's a good first start, Neil.
A first start it may be. The early criticism from Christian commentators is that it fails to make provision for schools and faith-based communities to operate according to their core set of values and accommodating the right to build a community of faith merely at the time of employment. So there's some fine-tuned details that need to be added to this first step, as you say, and no doubt there'll be all sorts of commentators and lawyers running over this sort of thought that the Law Reform Commission might have with a fine-tooth comb.
Oh, Neil, that's correct. But look, if you look at the terms of reference, and I've had a look at this carefully, Mark Dreyfus, the Attorney General, makes it clear that the review will ensure that an educational institution is able to conduct in accordance with their doctrines, tenets and beliefs or teachings of a particular religion. And as such, that means that, they're going to try and make sure that they uphold that basic principle. Now, again, I come back to the point, Neil. If Christian organisations, Christian lawyers, Christian advocacy groups, they've got to make sure that in their submission, they make the point that they want to make, and that is that we have a Religious Discrimination Act to protect people, in particular, as I said, the Essendon syndrome. We don't want those sort of situations coming up all the time, and the only way we're going to do that is if we unite and we put in a joint of a like mind that makes sure that this reform, this actual Australian Law Reform Commission review has input that will achieve the goals of Christians Australia-wide.
It could be the case, and perhaps the first glance, based on the commentary that's coming from various Christian commentators, that just ticking the box by saying, I'm a member of a religious community, might not be enough. Someone needing to hold on to the ethos of the school as they continue a teaching or employed career, whether you're in the office or whether you're the grounds person. All of those people within the Christian school context are going to be important, holding on to that ethos during their employment.
Oh, absolutely, Neil. I think that is going to be the critical submission that's going to be, highlighted right throughout any submission that Christian organisations or people make. The point is that we've got to make sure that schools are able to, and hospitals, and that'll be step 2 or 3 maybe, but schools in particular are able to employ, and Mark Dreyfus, the Attorney General, has said it will, schools are able to employ people of the faith of that school. Now, that is a good first start. The real issue, Neil, and it probably hasn't been raised yet, is what are they going to do with the Sex Discrimination Act, especially sections 37 and 38. Now, that's going to be a key test to what's going to happen with this review. And I urge everybody to make sure that they look at that provision in the SDA, because it's going to be one that Labor will want to fiddle with, and I'm a bit cautious about having Labor fiddle around that particular part of the Act.
Greg, no doubt there'll be a time set for this review, and there'll be some sort of report, and the Law Reform Commission will be wanting to give some sort of signal to the government as to how they can move forward. What ought Christians be doing in the meantime? Getting across the detail here, who ought we be talking to about concerns?
Oh, absolutely. Look, 2 things here. The report from the review is due by the 21st of April 2023. So we've got a bit of time here. The problem we've got is, as you know, January, December are pretty much sort of non-event months in terms of activity. So you've got about 2 or 3 months, solid 2 or 3 months to get together and talk to your churches. But in particular, Neil, go and lobby your government, your MP. This is what you're meant to be doing. You've got a new government in. Here's time to put pressure on it, and also get onto the coalition and get them to say, listen, what are you going to be doing to ensure that you at least partly deliver on the promise that you were meant to do when you're in government? So that's the coalition side. For Labor, you've got to get onto the MPs. And I have been writing to, the Attorney General. I've been writing to the Prime Minister's office, and I've been in discussions with them and the Attorney Generals, because I want to make sure that the Christian viewpoint is known and is held and is going to be delivered on. So, look, what you've got to do is talk to churches, talk to your MPs, and even talk to the media. And I remember my press release even got coverage in the US in Los Angeles saying that, this is sort of an interesting step that the Albanese government is taking. So, Neil, do what you're good at, people, lobby, and make sure your voice is heard.
Well, Greg, you're heading up a new organisation. It's called Christian Voice Australia, and listeners might not be able to find a website yet. I know you've got a website under construction. But good to talk to you, and on this new level as Christian Voice Australia. Greg Bondar, thanks so much for the update today on 2020.
Thank you for the opportunity, Neil, and God bless.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.